Story 1. I never believed in the legends. The stories that drifted through the school like whispers in the dark corners of the hallways. The stories about the forgotten hallway, a part of the school that no one ever mentioned in the tours, that no teacher ever talked about, and that none of the staff seemed willing to acknowledge. It was as though the school itself had erased it from existence. But that was before I got the job. It was my first day as the new night janitor at Kingsford High School. I had been hired just last week after my predecessor mysteriously quit. The hours were long and the work was tedious, but I needed the money, and the building was quiet after hours, perfect for someone who didn't mind solitude. My supervisor, Mr. Marsh, gave me a quick rundown of the school's cleaning protocol, pointing out the areas I needed to focus on: the hallways, the classrooms, the cafeteria, and the gymnasium. But when we got to the back of the school, he stopped, suddenly. "That's where you'll want to avoid," Mr. Marsh said, his voice low and almost hesitant. I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "That hallway. Just don't go in there. It's locked, and there's no reason to open it." He didn't elaborate, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He moved quickly past the door at the end of the hall, the one he had just gestured to. I tried to ignore it, but as I worked that night, a strange curiosity began to gnaw at me. What was behind that door? And why was Mr. Marsh so afraid of it? It wasn't until a few nights later that I found myself standing in front of it. The door at the end of the hall was unmarked, slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. The hallway beyond seemed dark, cold, and untouched, despite the rest of the school being filled with students during the day. I knew I should turn around, but something compelled me to enter. As I stepped through the door, I immediately felt the temperature drop. My breath became visible, and a strange silence settled around me. The hallway stretched out in front of me, old wooden lockers lining the walls, some of which were cracked or half open, as if they hadn't been touched in years. The flickering fluorescent lights above cast long, unnatural shadows that seemed to shift with each passing second. I took a few cautious steps forward, my flashlight illuminating the path ahead. The further I walked, the more unsettled I became. The air was thick with dust, but it wasn't just the stagnant atmosphere that was bothering me. It was the feeling that something was watching me, a presence lurking just beyond my vision. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Suddenly, a distant sound reached my ears. A faint thumping, like someone was tapping on the floor in a rhythmic pattern. I froze, my heart racing. The noise seemed to be coming from the far end of the hallway, but when I turned to look, I saw nothing. Pushing the panic down, I continued walking, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I didn't know why I was still going forward. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was the unshakable feeling that I needed to uncover what was hidden here. At the end of the hallway, I found a door. It was old, its paint peeling, and the handle was rusted. But there was something else, something odd. The door seemed to be calling to me, like a whisper I couldn't ignore. I opened it. The room behind the door was unlike any classroom I had ever seen. It was dark, and the only light came from a single lamp in the corner, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The furniture was covered in dust, and a layer of grime coated the windows, blocking the moonlight from filtering in. But it wasn't the room that struck me as odd. It was the walls. They were covered in strange symbols, scratched into the plaster. Some of them looked like words, others like cryptic drawings. I leaned closer, inspecting them, when I suddenly heard a voice, a soft, whispering sound. "Leave. Leave now." I spun around, but there was no one in the room. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the windows, trapping me inside. My heart raced as I frantically tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. The whispering continued, growing louder, filling my ears with voices. "You should have stayed away." The lights flickered, and I saw something in the corner of the room, a shadow. tall and thin, standing just outside the beam of my flashlight. It didn't move, it just watched. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear, my mind screaming for me to escape, but my body refused to obey. The shadow seemed to grow taller, more menacing, as the whispers intensified. "You'll never leave," it hissed. "You'll never escape." The room began to feel smaller, the walls pressing in on me as the temperature dropped even further. My breath came in ragged gasps, and the light from my flashlight flickered, threatening to go out. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the door flew open. I stumbled out, heart pounding in my chest, desperate to get away from that room, from that hallway. I didn't look back as I ran through the school, the sound of my frantic footsteps echoing in the empty halls. But when I reached the front door, it wouldn't open. It was locked. I tried every exit, every door I could find, but all of them were sealed shut. Panic rose in my chest as I realized the building wasn't letting me leave. I heard it then, the sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, dragging. It was coming closer. I turned, my body trembling, and saw the figure standing at the far end of the hallway. The shadow had taken form. It was a man, tall and thin, with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched wide in a twisted grin. "You shouldn't have gone down there," the figure whispered. "Now you belong to this place." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The walls closed in, and the hallways seemed to stretch further, longer, as though it had no end. And in the distance, I could hear the sound of more footsteps, more whispers, echoing in the emptiness. I was trapped in the forgotten hallway, a place that had been erased from existence, yet still existed, waiting for the next person to stumble into its grasp. Story 2. It was just another year at Westbrook High, a school that was known more for its academic achievements than its sense of mystery. But there was something about Mrs. Howell, our new English teacher, that unsettled me. Her quiet demeanor, the way she would always gaze a little too long into the distance, and the way her eyes seemed to follow me, even when I wasn't looking. The class was small, only about a dozen students. Mrs. Howell seemed like a kind enough person, at first strict, but fair. She had a passion for literature and would often assign projects about things like Edgar Allan Poe and Lovecraft, stories of the macabre that always piqued my interest. But it wasn't until we started reading The Haunting of Hill House that I began to feel like something was wrong. Every day, Mrs. Howell would ask us to stay after class for private discussions about the book. It wasn't unusual for her to ask students to stay behind. She was a teacher, after all. But the odd thing was, the students she asked to stay would always act different. They would leave the room, but there was a strange look in their eyes. It was as if they had seen something behind that door, something that changed them. It wasn't until the second week that I found out what was going on. One afternoon, I lingered after class, trying to finish up an assignment when I heard a low, almost imperceptible murmur coming from Mrs. Howell's office. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. I peered around the corner, and through the crack of the office door, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Mrs. Howell wasn't alone. There was a student with her, one of the quiet ones from class. His name was Jason. His face was pale, his eyes glassy, as though he was in some sort of trance. Mrs. Howell was standing in front of him, her hands placed on his temples, murmuring something in a language I didn't recognize. The air in the room grew colder as I watched, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't until I saw her face twisted into an unnatural grin that I realized something was horribly wrong. Mrs. Howell wasn't just teaching literature. She was feeding on her students. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. What was she doing? I had to get out of there, but I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor, and a sense of unease washed over me. I couldn't pull away from the scene, couldn't tear my eyes from Mrs. Howell's face, which had grown more and more grotesque the longer I stared. Her eyes had turned black, her skin pale, and her smile. It seemed too wide, like it shouldn't be human. I turned and bolted, running down the hall and out into the safety of the open air. I didn't know what I had just witnessed, but I knew one thing for sure. Something was horribly wrong with Mrs. Howell. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced, filled with images of what I had seen. The way Jason's face looked so empty, as if he wasn't truly there, as if he had been drained of his very essence. I had to know more. I had to understand what was happening in that classroom. The next day, I decided to confront her. I stayed after class, just as she had asked the others, but this time, I wasn't going to let her pull me into whatever strange ritual she was performing. She smiled at me as I approached her desk. "I'm glad you stayed behind," she said. Her voice was soft, but there was an underlying menace in it, like a predator trying to be kind to its prey. "You've been quite the curious student." I froze. There it was again, that coldness in her voice, that unnatural quality to her words. She wasn't talking to me like a teacher anymore. She was talking to me like I was something else, something she had been waiting for. "Isn't it strange," she continued, "how books can reveal so much about us, how they can strip away the layers of who we are, exposing our darkest desires?" I swallowed hard, trying to remain calm. "What are you doing to your students?" She tilted her head, her smile widening. "What do you think I'm doing?" I backed away slightly, my heart racing. "I saw you with Jason. What are you doing to him? What are you doing to all of them?" Her smile faltered for a brief moment before it returned, more sinister than before. "What you saw was nothing. Jason is simply learning, and so will you if you decide to stay. I can show you things you've never dreamed of. I can unlock the deepest parts of your mind, but you must be willing to give yourself up." I took another step back, my mind spinning. "Give myself up? What do you mean?" She stood up slowly, her gaze never leaving me. "There are ways of connecting with people, ways that go beyond the physical, ways that involve the soul. I've learned how to draw power from those I teach, to feed from them, and in return, they receive something far more valuable: knowledge, wisdom, immortality, if you will." Her voice grew softer, almost coaxing. "I can make you better, if you let me." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, to escape. But something in me, something deep, primal, made me stay. Her words were like a whisper in my mind, coaxing me closer. My head felt foggy, my limbs heavy. I took another step back, fighting the pull she had on me. This is insane." She smiled, her eyes gleaming. "Perhaps, but it's the truth. You see, Westbrook High has always been a place of power. Long before we were here, the school was founded on something, an ancient pact, if you will. And it's always been my job to ensure that we maintain that power, that we never lose it." I felt my stomach drop. "A pact?" Mrs. Howell stepped closer, her hand reaching out toward me. "Yes, and now it's your turn to be part of it. Will you join us? Will you give yourself to the knowledge, or will you leave and let it all fade away?" I didn't know what to say. My mind was clouded, my thoughts tangled in her words. Something inside me screamed to run, but something else, something darker, wanted to step forward and embrace what she was offering. That's when I heard the door open behind me. Jason's voice, called out softly, his voice distant, as though he were coming from a faraway place. "Don't listen to her." I spun around, seeing Jason standing in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes glassy, but there was something different about him. He was aware, "She's not what she seems," Jason said quietly, his voice trembling. "She's been doing this for years. She doesn't just teach us, she drains us. All of us who stayed too long, don't fall for it. Please, you have to stop her." I could barely process his words. I could see the terror in his eyes, the desperation in his tone. Mrs. Howell turned slowly to face him, her expression unreadable. She was silent for a long moment, before a smile slowly spread across her face once again. "Run along, Jason," she said sweetly. "You've had your turn. Now, it's someone else's turn." I saw Jason's face change, his eyes wide with fear. But before he could say anything else, Mrs. Howell raised her hand, and the air in the room grew thick, suffocating. Jason collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently, his body jerking and twitching. "No!" I shouted, rushing to him. But I was too late. Jason's body went limp, his eyes wide open, unblinking. The life had been drained from him. I looked up at Mrs. Howell, my heart pounding in my chest. She was standing there, smiling, as though nothing had happened. "That's the price we pay for power," she said softly. "And now, you will too." I turned and fled, running down the hall, my mind reeling. I didn't know if I would ever be able to escape her, escape what she had done to me, to everyone who had crossed her path. I don't know what she is, or what she's capable of, but I know one thing for sure: she will never stop. And she'll keep coming for anyone who dares to question her, anyone who dares to uncover her secret. Stroy 3. I didn't think much about the yearbook committee. Most students didn't. It was just a group of kids assigned to take pictures and put together something to remember the school year by. Simple, ordinary, a bit boring even. But that's before we found it. It was a Friday afternoon when we found the old dusty box. I was staying late in the yearbook room, trying to finish a section on the spring sports teams. Most of the committee had already left, but there were a few of us still hanging around, finishing up the final details. The room was empty except for the clattering of keyboards and the soft hum of the overhead lights. We were digging through old archives, looking for pictures from past events, when I noticed something strange in the corner of the room, an old wooden box tucked beneath a pile of forgotten memorabilia. It was out of place. This room was filled with stacks of yearbooks from decades past, but this box, it wasn't like anything else. It was old, ancient, even. The wood was darkened with age, and strange markings were carved into the surface. "What's this?" I muttered to myself. I pulled it from the corner, and it creaked open, revealing an old yearbook from the late 1992. The cover was faded, the text barely visible, and there was something unsettling about the way the book felt in my hands. It was heavier than it should have been, and the pages inside looked yellowed and brittle. "Hey, check this out!" I called to my friends, who were busy across the room. Sarah, the editor, wandered over first, her curiosity piqued by the strange find. "What is it?" she asked, peering at the yearbook with a frown. "This doesn't look like one of ours." I flipped through the pages, and the first thing that struck me was the photos. They were strange. The faces in the pictures didn't look quite right, too stiff, too posed, like they were smiling, but something in their eyes seemed off. The further I flipped through the yearbook, the more uncomfortable I became. The students in the photos there were no names next to them, no identifiers, just faces, frozen in time. And then, on the last page, I saw it. A photo of a group of students, all smiling. They looked familiar, almost too familiar, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen them before. They were standing together in front of the same old-school building, their eyes too wide, their smiles too bright. But what caught my attention was the way the photo had been marked. The faces of two students were crossed out with a thick, black line. I ran my fingers over the image. The black marks were still fresh, even though the yearbook was at least 2 decades old. Something felt wrong, and the air around me seemed to grow heavier. I shivered. Who are these people? I muttered. Sarah took the book from me, flipping through it herself. This is weird, she said. Whoever put this together didn't even write their names. What is this thing? Where did it come from? Just as I was about to respond, we heard the sound of footsteps echoing in the hall. Mr. Thompson, our yearbook advisor, had entered the room, his face tight with concern. "Put that down," he snapped, his voice sharp and urgent. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Mr. Thompson had never spoken to us like that. He was usually laid back, friendly even, but his eyes were wide with fear, and his hands were trembling as he quickly snatched the book from us. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "Where did you find this?" Mr. Thompson asked, his tone low and frantic. "In the back," I said. "In that old box." "What's the matter with it?" He glanced at the photo, his face going pale. That's impossible," he muttered. "You should never have touched that." "Why? What's wrong with it?" I pressed, but Mr. Thompson only stared at the photo, his expression darkening. He seemed paralyzed with fear. "This yearbook was never meant to be found," he whispered. "It should have been destroyed." He suddenly slammed the book shut, his hands shaking, and quickly placed it in a drawer of his desk, locking it. I opened my mouth to ask him what was going on, but before I could speak, he held up a hand. "Leave," he said, his voice cold. Now, we didn't question him. There was something in his voice that made me feel like I had crossed a line I shouldn't have. I grabbed my things, and Sarah and I left the room in silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the yearbook, about the photo, about the 2 students whose faces had been crossed out. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I knew them. I couldn't remember their names, but I had seen their faces before. Where? The answer came to me slowly, as if a fog was clearing in my mind. They were students who had disappeared from the school years ago. I was too young to remember the details, but the rumors had been there, whispers about students vanishing, about the school's dark history. I had to know more. The next day, I returned to the yearbook room after everyone else had gone home. The lights flickered as I walked in, and the air felt thick with tension. I approached a locked drawer, my heart racing, and, with trembling hands, retrieved the key I had noticed Mr. Thompson used earlier. It only took a moment to open the drawer, and I pulled the yearbook out again. I flipped through the pages once more, but this time, something was different. The faces in the photos seemed to shift, as if the students were staring at me. I quickly turned the pages, but then I stopped dead. On the last page, where the group photo had been, there was now a new image. The 2 students whose faces had been crossed out were there, in the photo again, but their expressions had changed. They weren't smiling anymore. Their eyes were wide with fear, and their mouths were twisted in silent screams. I could hear it then, a low whispering sound from the photo, like the students were speaking to me. "Help us," the voice whispered. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath turned to fog, and the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe, as if the walls themselves were alive. I backed away slowly, but the photo seemed to pull me in. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. "You shouldn't have looked. You shouldn't have touched it." I turned and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. I could hear footsteps following me, soft at first, then louder, faster. But when I looked over my shoulder, no one was there. The next morning, I came to school in a daze. I wasn't sure what was real anymore, and I was terrified of what would happen next. I avoided the yearbook room, staying as far away from it as possible, but the whispers didn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear them, the voices of those students, trapped in the pages of that cursed yearbook. And then, as the days passed, I began to notice something strange. The students in the yearbook, the ones whose faces had been crossed out, weren't the only ones who had vanished. One by one, people started to disappear from the school. It wasn't immediate. It was subtle at first, a few students here and there, their desks empty, their names slowly fading from the attendance lists. The whispers told me it was too late. The yearbook was no longer just a book. It had become a curse. It had taken the souls of those who had been marked, and now it was coming for me. The last time I saw Sarah, she was staring at the yearbook, her face frozen in terror. The whispers were all around her, and then she disappeared. I don't know what happened to her, but now I know the truth. The yearbook isn't just a collection of memories. It's a trap, a gateway to something darker, and anyone who dares to open it is doomed to become part of it. I don't know if anyone can stop it, but I've seen the signs, and now I hear the whispers every night. I don't know when the next disappearance will happen, but I can't stop thinking about that photo, the one where the students' faces were crossed out. Now, my name is starting to fade from the yearbook, and I think I'm next.